So, it's 1 o'clock. It's time to start. Welcome to Hanaholmen's Industry Forum, titled "The Old World Order is Cancelled: Investments for Competitiveness and Security." I'm actually quite happy to see so many of you here today, both in this room and also online. The title has caused some worried contacts asking if the seminar is cancelled. But I'm happy that you understood to be here. So welcome once again. My name is Johanna Hannus. I work as a project manager here at Hanaholmen, and I will be your host today. And before we proceed to the actual program, I'd like to take a few moments to go through some safety guidelines. We have 3 emergency exits. You have actually entered through 2 of them here on my left and your right, and then we actually have a third one over here on the stage. So in an event of an emergency, please follow the signs to safely exit the building. When you are outside of the building, there is a designated emergency meeting place, which is located just next to the parking lot here on the outside of the house. And if you need any help during the event, you are always you can contact our colleagues at the reception desk, and they will help you. So, without further ado, I would like to start and welcome our own CEO, Gunvor Kronman, to the stage with me, and I will give you a mic. There you go. You have been the CEO for Hanaholmen for 23 years, if I'm allowed to tell it. And I believe you are probably the one person in Finland and Sweden who knows what it means when to collaborate and cooperate between Finland and Sweden. So what would you say during this century? What has happened with collaboration between Finland and Sweden during these years?
Well, it's been quite a journey. I think at some period there was, of course, the collaboration. First of all, has always been good, very friendly, no conflicts. We never been at war together, thank God. Maybe at some point it was a little bit more ceremonial, a lot of words. Of course, also, I would say today we are in a very, very different time. The war on Ukraine, Russia's war on Ukraine, the kind of breakdown of some of other very close relationships has pushed the region together in a completely new way. But it's not only that, it's also that collaboration is becoming much more practical. And what we see here at Hanaholmen is really that from seminars, now we're sitting in a seminar today, but we see more and more roundtables, networking occasions, working groups, anything from parliamentary committees to civil society networks, municipalities. Municipalities is a sector that has suddenly woken up to that we actually need to get to know each other. And we do see that there has been a break in the relationship. So the rebuilding of personal relationships at all levels of society is a big task that we actually conduct here at Hanaholmen.
We are, of course, a collaboration and cooperation center between mainly Finland and Sweden, but also work more broadly with the larger Nordics and Baltics. And we are going to talk a little bit about this, of course, here today as well. Why do you see collaboration within the larger Nordics and Baltics as important?
Well, I think the first starting point is that it benefits Finland and Sweden to have a broader regional cooperation. Geopolitics is, of course, a given. Security is a driver, but not only. It's also the shared values, the democratic structures of our societies. It's our advanced technological competencies and a realization that we are stronger together, that we actually can leverage what we have if we work together. I think the big question is if and how, and I hope that today we're going to focus on those two questions.
That was my third question. So what do you hope to see as the result today? So maybe this is then the conclusion or the start.
Well, to leverage what we have, we actually have a lot in this region. We are in one of those better places in the world today. To leverage and to come to concrete actions. And I hope that everybody goes home with some kind of concrete idea. What could I do?
Thank you, Gunvor. I truly hope that we succeed with this. A warm applause. And then to shed some more light on Swedish-Finnish cooperation, I would also like to welcome Sweden's ambassador to Finland to the stage. And Peter Eriksson, please, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Johanna. And right, so as the ambassador of Sweden to Finland, my most repeated message is that Finland is Sweden's closest bilateral partner. And in fact, the Finnish government agrees, most recently expressed in its report on changes in the foreign and security policy environment that was presented last week. So this is, of course, perfectly natural considering our shared history, our ever-growing cooperation, and our deeply integrated economies. And as a framework nation for the NATO force FLF Finland, Sweden has in fact even adopted Finland's eastern border as our own. You can't get much closer than that. This is of course a strength for both of our countries. We are operating in a more demanding security environment. We see a changing world order, which maybe hasn't been cancelled, but where rules are undermined and challenged, if not broken. And as like-minded countries standing up for multilateralism, there are many reasons to cooperate. Defense and security is one of those areas where cooperation between Sweden and Finland advances very rapidly, in large part, of course, thanks to our NATO membership, but also based on or building on already close bilateral ties. This has not only strengthened our ability to address shared security challenges in our region, it has also highlighted the close connection between security policy, industrial capacity, and long-term resilience. It is important to continue growing our strengths. Despite our relatively small size as individual countries, we bring together advanced industries, strong institutions, and highly integrated markets. We are very innovative, and we're seen as reliable and trusted partners internationally. This, in fact, holds true for the entire Nordic-Baltic region. From a government perspective, our priority is to ensure a competitive and business-friendly climate with low barriers to trade. Finland and Sweden share this commitment, and it's a key priority for our cooperation, both within and outside the EU. The joint meeting between our two governments in Stockholm in September of 2024 provided a concrete expression of the political commitment to deepen cooperation further. The meeting resulted in a joint declaration to strengthen collaboration in a number of areas, marking a step from coordination towards more systematic and forward-looking joint action. In the current security environment, we do see several challenges to industrial success. Supply chain vulnerabilities, regulatory burden, long development cycles, rising technological complexity, and difficulties in scaling due to our relatively small national markets. However, the Nordic region is particularly well placed to respond through deeper integration of value chains and forms of cooperation that build on our complementarity. The Nordic and Baltic countries have a clear potential to continue building competitive industrial ecosystems. I hope this forum can provide an opportunity to explore new ideas and opportunities in this regard. I would like to thank Gunvor and Hanaholmen for hosting this topical industry forum, and we are very happy as the embassy to be associated with it. I look forward to hearing your perspectives and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, Peter, for your introductory remarks. Now it's time for our keynote speaker, but before I introduce him, I want to instruct you a little bit. I think we should, in a minute or two, get some QR codes up here on the screens and a code to Mentimeter, through which you can ask or pose a question to our keynote speaker. I will moderate this and then ask a few or a couple of those questions then to our keynote speaker after his keynote. So, now let me introduce Erik Thedéen. You are the governor of the Swedish Riksbank and you will hold your keynote here on the podium. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for hosting this. And I must say that also for the Swedish Central Bank, Finland is the closest, or definitely one of the closest allies we have in the international central bank community. In the era of uncertainty and rapid change in the world, the issue of social resilience is most critical for us and for Sweden. The 24th of February, 2022, I was waking up in a hotel room in Paris. That was the day of the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine. I was thinking what to do. I was then heading up our Swedish supervisory authority. And I saw risks coming also for us. When it comes to financial stability, what could Russians do when it comes to cyber threat and the rest? I decided at that moment to call up the most important people in our intelligence system and defense forces. My idea was that now we need to cooperate in the full society when it comes to resilience. And it was very easy to get a quick answer. The sense of urgency had arrived. It was end of endless bureaucratic meetings on how to organize ourselves. All of a sudden, we had a common interest to defend ourselves, not only military, but also on the civil side. Said and done, we, from that moment, have much more of that thinking, both in, generally speaking, in Sweden, but also in the central bank community. So, the worsened geopolitical situations is the new threats and risks for countries in our part of the world, not only in military nature, but also economic risks such as tariffs, supply chains being affected. Meeting this challenge requires fundamentals, economic fundamentals that are stable and the national economy to be strong. In this context, we are, in Sweden, well equipped. Inflation is back to target and the Swedish national debt is low, as you can see on the left side graph here. Our public debt is running around 35%. And sometimes people ask me, why is it so low? And some economists would answer to such a question that that's because our fiscal framework is so tight. But I would turn it the other way around. Our fiscal framework is tight because we experienced the 1990 crisis. The 1990 crisis was the moment when Swedes and Swedish politicians realized that we could not have high indebtedness because that creates vulnerabilities for the society. Hence, we have since had a political commitment to keep our finances stable. But that's not all. We also need to have inflation low, and you can see in the right-hand chart that Sweden, together with the rest of the world, now have a low inflation environment, and we are actually in a slightly better position than many other countries going into this Iran war when it comes to inflation, as inflation is actually running slightly below our target. But it also requires enterprise and innovative corporates. For smaller economies in the Nordic and Baltic countries, close cooperation with like-minded countries is of the essence. During periods of geopolitical stability, investments have sometimes taken other priorities. We have focused on speed, we have focused on low cost, but not on resilience. That is now changing. As the geopolitical changes deteriorates, it becomes clear that we need to invest in our security and redundancy to have the capacity to prevent and manage serious situations that may arise. This is how we build resilience for our societies. Unlike some other countries, Finland is a good example. You choose to dismantle, you choose not to dismantle your total defense after the Cold War, and have continuously invested both military and your civil defense. You are the role model. So you are the great example where we follow, and we also now, especially I would argue, build up our civil defense. Of course, we're also doing military, but that's well known and is done in many other countries as well. In a rapidly changing world, our vulnerabilities become more visible, not least where we are dependent on others. We are now much more dependent on the outside world than we were in previous security crises. The financial markets in the Nordic and Baltic countries are tightly integrated. For example, several banks have their operations in several countries. You could bluntly say that the Baltic banking system is de facto a Swedish banking system. Our countries have common interest in financial stability. We work intensively together with all the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries. We do stress testing, we do crisis drills, and we constantly discuss how we could improve the resilience. We have now in Sweden built up a sectoral civil defense system where one sector is the financial markets and payments. And we are doing a lot to be better prepared. The same is done in other sectors like food, energy, and many of the rest. We at the Riksbank has also legal powers to actually demand that the banking system increase their resilience. They should have more data centers, they should train their personnel, they should be able to run the payment system also in a crisis situation, or if the worst should happen, in a war situation. So what you could say then on the payment system. So this chart shows you payments in the Nordic region and how we are dependent and the level of digitalization. And the first row is very telling and very unique, I would say, for the Nordic countries, i.e. the percentage of payments made with cash in store. Very low numbers. So, of course, this is true also in Finland, so this is nothing new, but if I talk to my kids, they basically have never seen any note at all. I actually use notes and coins regularly, and I also tell the Swedish people that they should do so. And recently, we had a press announcement recommending the Swedish individual to have at least 1,000 kronor for emergency use. 1,000 kronor is about 100 euros. And we also say that you can't just store the cash. You need to use the cash. Otherwise, stores will not have the capacity to actually handle cash. Also, there is now a legislation proposal to make it compulsory for grocery stores and pharmacies to accept cash. So before the press conferences I have when announcing interest rate decisions and talk about payment system, I also always pay a visit to the local store and buy me a Coca-Cola. Why? Well, I'm thirsty, but also I always get the question, do you use cash? And then I can say, yes, I just did. So it's also a communication trick, let's say. Well, if you look on the rest of the graph, you all know then that cash is, we don't use cash or very little in the Nordic region. We have been paying some attention to our dependence on the infrastructure of payments outside cash. And as you can see here, the flags indicate which country are providing the services. And in Finland, in Iceland, and in Sweden, that's the US. So we have Visa and MasterCard, US-based. They work perfectly with us. So we have nothing to complain about when it comes to working with these organizations. But thinking of it, also I would argue 10 years before this crisis or the situation we are in right now, is it wise to have 80-90% of your regular payment system outsourced to another country? Probably not. And now I don't need to mention why it's not wise in this situation. Of course, we have a different geopolitical situation and a different attitude to how to use your economic power for geopolitical reasons on the other side of the Atlantic, and that calls for some caution. When it comes to the main infrastructure, it varies also, but there we have it very much run on Swedish systems, but we will increasingly, as Finland, use the European system, i.e. the Euro system's infrastructure for payments. So de facto, although having our own currency and not the euro, we will actually use the payment system, the targets or the tips, or what all the nicknames are for the systems in Europe. We are also been working on making it possible to use this digital payment system offline. And from the 1st of July this year, we will be able to use the card transaction also offline, i.e. we could use them if their connections fail to their domestic banking system. But I think this graph anyway shows that we have a lot of dependencies that making us more vulnerable and in a way that we probably didn't think about a couple of years ago. I talked about offline, I talked about multiple payment system, I talked about resilience. Let me say a few words about our mobile payment system, Swish. This is now, I think you have a similar in Finland, but it's not as used, I think, as the Swedish system. So Swish is basically a mobile pay system. And it's now become an expression between parents that you have a Swish relation with your kids. Because basically kids, they not only ask for a Swish transfer, they could send a request on your phone to have a Swish transfer. I actually got one the other day because my youngest son is buying new tires to his car, and apparently he thinks I should pay for it. So it came as a request on Swish. Swish is a huge success. It started with person to person. It's much increasingly also for paying, especially online shopping. And the good thing with Swish, it's outside the car payment system. So we're now also working with Swish trying to make that offline. So then we will have an alternative if something happens to the card payment system. And as I said, on the infrastructure, we're working intensively with our European friends to have access to that system. That creates sometimes a little bit of an issue. Finland is a Euro country. You are part of all the governance structures within the ECB. We are not. So when we'll be part of the infrastructure for payment, we are now also working how to be part of that part of the governance structure. But we are for sure welcomed by the Euro system because, of course, they see us also as a strategic partner. In parallel with operational measures to strengthen the resilience in the payment system, we also need to think strategically. Conflicts around the world show that digital infrastructure can be exposed to both cyber and physical attacks, risking the disruption of critical functions. We believe that strengthen the autonomy by promoting innovation, competition, and development of payment service based on Swedish, Nordic, and European infrastructure is key. This requires both private and public actors acting together and investing together as well. We central banks need to be the driving force and active in our areas, such as payment. We can facilitate our Nordic cooperations, both between our decision makers and between business communities. I thought I should say a few words ending here on what we should do to continue to be prepared. I think we need to talk about resilience in a broad way. We need to have buffers. If things go wrong, we need to be able to be prepared to take action. We need strong fiscal position. That's why I am also said, although I typically don't talk about fiscal policy, I've said it's key in my country that we stick to our fiscal framework. Why is that? When you enter into a crisis, countries with low debt have the possibility to take action. Countries with high debt won't. And my best example to this, what I often use, is France. France are very high indebtedness. If they end up in a crisis, then they need to take action, they need to borrow money, they will be and have been punished by the bond market, i.e. they are locked in their fiscal indebtedness. That is not wise. It makes the overall economic policy much harder to facilitate. And that's why I also, as a central bank governor, think that I could actually have some thoughts when it comes to fiscal policy. It is important for also the effectiveness of monetary policy. Build trust in institutions, including independent central banks. This is very topical in my communities, given what's happening in the US with the Federal Reserve. And I sometimes get the question from international friends, how about your independence for the Riksbank in Sweden? And I tend to say, and I get more and more people agreeing, that if anything, the independence of the Swedish central bank and for Swedish institutions have strengthened after the attacks against the Federal Reserve and other institutions in the US. People realize that this is a clear value for the society, is a clear value for our possibilities to grow and prosper. Cooperate with friends in Europe and globally. I talk often with the governor of Finland's bank, Olli Rehn. I talk often with the Danish governor and the Norwegian governor, but I also talk almost as often with my Baltic governor friends, because again, they are an integrated part. I also talk with the Federal Reserve and the ECB, and of course, other European central banks. We have a very, very strong community, and I think this is also key for crisis preparedness. And it's also key to have that kind of dialogue going, although in situation when it might be more difficult on the political levels. To finish, this last week I met with the Ukraine governor of the Ukrainian central bank, Prishny. I know him because I was the first central bank governor to visit Kiev after the war, and I visited them in December 2023. He's a dear friend. What he always reminds me of, and he did so also to the staff of the Riksbank when he visited us in 2024, you need to plan for the worst, because that's the way to handle a crisis situation. And they, of course, also plan for the worst, but they've also been planning as the war continues. One thing they do is they have the kindergarten in the cellar of the Central Bank of Ukraine. Why? Because parents, when they came and worked at the Central Bank, they worried so much about their kids when the bombing and shelling was going on in the neighborhoods outside Kiev, so they couldn't work. And the conclusion was, bring in the kids. So you don't worry about where they are during the day, and then you will work more efficiently, and also the kids might be safer. That's an extreme version of resilience. And to hear him talk on their situation and what they do, and also the visit on ground was very, very interesting. And when it comes to the payment system, their electronic payment system has been working 24/7 since February 2022. And then you might say the conclusion is that you don't need cash. That's not his conclusion. His conclusion is that you need cash because when the war started, a lot of people used more cash, but eventually realized that they could actually trust the electronic systems and then continue to use that. And on the margin, that actually happened also in my country, probably also in Finland. When the war broke up, you saw a little bit uptick in the use of cash because people got afraid and they tried to safeguard their possibility to pay for groceries and pharmacy visits or what have you. With that, I stop and take questions.
There came a lot of different questions here. I will not ask the political one about Sweden and the euro.
I always get that one. And I always say it's above my pay grade.
There we have. But there is a question regarding the European banking system. You talked about this. Is the European banking system equipped to offer an alternative to a US-led decentralized financial infrastructure instead of the fueled by CBDC? I don't know what
that's
that is.
Central bank digital currency. You have a banker in the crowd here.
I have a banker here then, instead of US government debt, it says.
So this is a big question whether the dollar dominance will continue. I think that generally speaking, the euro or the krona for that matter will not be taken over. We will not be dollarized in the sense that you can see in some African countries and other developing countries. But of course, this is a very topical question because, as I said, we are dominated by Visa and MasterCard. We're also dominated by the US investment banks. And we also have a tendency now that a lot of the infrastructure, not only in the cards, but also what's called stable coins, but all the bankers here will realize what that is. But stable coins is basically, you could say, a private financial alternative where you also pay in dollars, that could increase the dollar dominance. Of course, the euro is taking a lot of steps to defend themselves, including the CBDC. So I'm not overly worried, but I think it's a reminder that we need to actually take action to safeguard our payment system. Otherwise, it will, the innovation is coming from the US and we need to do more. And our banking system, generally speaking, is much more split, let's say, than the US. And that, we have less of big champions than they have in the US.
And then a question regarding technology and AI. How prepared is the Nordic banking system towards threats, it says, from AI, such as Mythos by Anthropic?
So Mythos was very, very topical when I went to the IMF meetings last week in Washington. Everybody talked about it. And there's, of course, a lot of talk and articles also in this region. So generally speaking, when I get this question, I say that the good thing, if any good, it's good with cyber, is that banks, including central banks, get attacked by cyber attacks, on a constant basis every day, 24/7, 365 days a year. So this is nothing new, and I'm not, an expert in this. The new seems to be that this is so more advanced with this AI Mythos, for example. So I think you should be worried, because all the experts that know anything about this are worried. So who am I to tell that you should not be worried? But I also feel a little bit, confident in the sense that I think we have a good preparedness to start with. We have something to start with, but this might be a totally new level of threats coming from these AI tools.
So we live in a society that is really, there's threats coming from everywhere. I hope that we today can find something good in all this bad. But thank you so much, and a big applause, warm applause to Eric. And now the time has come for our first panel. So please let me introduce the moderator for our panel, Antti Rauhala. You're the program manager for something called the Economic Security Forum, and you work with questions related to security, resilience, and sovereignty. So please, Antti, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Johanna. Please let me welcome our panelists on the stage first. Please take your seats. So as we have heard today already, I think it's clear that we are going through this paradigm shift where we need to ask not just how do we create new prosperity, but how do we protect our prosperity and our values in this new world. And defense industries are in some ways the backbone of that resilience and security. So in this panel, we're going to discuss how is this paradigm shift of scaling defense spending, how is that looking like on the level of Nordic defense industries and individual companies, and how can we make sure that as these industries grow in this volatile era, that that prosperity also drives growth in other sectors of the economy. So to my left, to your right, we have Lauri Kangas, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the Finnish Defense and Aerospace Industries Association, which brings together the entire defense industry ecosystem in Finland. Next, we have Petri Toljamo, the CEO of Bittium, which is a increasingly defense-oriented hardware technology company focused on secure communications. And then we have Fredrik Hassel, who is a senior public affairs advisor at Saab, which is Nordic's largest defense corporation and has a portfolio spanning from fighter jets to submarines. And finally, we have Morten Nielsen, who is business development manager at Terma, which is a major Danish defense and aerospace company and acts as an important contractor in the production, for example, of F-35 fighter jets. So let me start with you, Lauri. If you look at this shift that we have undergone since 2022 in ramping up defense spending, how is this current scaling of phase looking like in the Finnish defense industrial ecosystem? And do you see any bottlenecks where that growth is encountering difficulties?
Well, yes, indeed. The growth is accelerating fast, and if we compare to the situation prior to 22, in Finland we had the combined revenue of our industries was, I believe, like 2.6 billion euros, and now we're talking in 25 numbers, we're going over 4.2 billion euros, and we actually already have the vision that by the end of the decade we will reach 12 billions in Finland. So a major growth factor for the whole nation of Finland could be employing almost 40,000 directly. The current number is 12,000. So we're talking about tens of thousands of new jobs the industry might bring. The question was also what's the current state. The challenge is of course, the market is political, and the lead times have been quite long also. In 22, we saw practically none growth at all. It was shy of 10%. Then in 23, we saw the increase of the revenues was like 15%, then over 20, and now we're talking already over 30% of annual growth of the businesses. So it's really remarkable. But there's so much to go on and so much to achieve in the Finnish industry view. And perhaps the main hurdles are the European market. Is the market really a market? Is it an open market? Is there barriers to enter the international scale? So there's something to address on.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we want to return to, is like how do we grow these things, not just nationally, but regionally. But before we get to that, let's move on to Petri. So Bittium is actually a very interesting case study because as I was reading about your company, you have actually reclassified as a defense company just last month from a civilian technology company. And this is a perfect example of this shift that we have been going through. So could you reflect on that pivot, and also how is Finland as a country to grow a defense company compared to that previous experience as a civilian technology company?
All right, I think that for us this change of the reclassification wasn't really a pivot. I think we are seeing its acknowledgement of the situation we are currently at. So long time ago, we made a decision to focus on defense kind of a military communication. And I think the change was already, or decision was made on that time already. And why I think this is important is to have these change for the defense is that actually brings the clarity. So the clarity for the customers, partners and stakeholders, it's important that they recognize that this is the main focus of our business and we want to invest. And with respect to is the Finland good place to grow this kind of company, I think the short answer is yes. I think that not just on the paper. So with the Finnish Defence Forces, we have built over a decade a kind of the defense communication system which can handle the Russian kind of interference and electrical warfare. And this is not just a commercial partnership; it's a shared national mission. And that I think this it's really the system we have developed. It's hardened, it's interoperable, and it's really tested in the system. And what we need to do here more in Finland, I think that we are getting now the support for the trade promotion, but I think we need to bring this ministry level support for the next level. It should need to be kind of strategic advocacy at the government to government level, and the way the large defense nations are doing it. And also that I think procurement timelines, those needs to match the pace of the threat environment. So deterrence has a shorter lead times than the budget cycles. So those were my takeaways.
Do you think that we are moving into a right direction when it comes to these issues?
Yeah, I think we are moving to the right direction, but I think that as we are spending a lot of time and traveling every week, meeting the customers and also the every stakeholders, and even if we are improving at the same time, the pace, how the competition and the other countries are moving, it's really impressive.
Thank you. Fredrik, so Saab is a huge industrial anchor in the defense industry in the entire Nordic level. And when you reflect on this reality of rising defense budgets and political ambitions on strategic autonomy, how is that scaling effort looking like to you when you reflect on what happens on the factory floor when you compare that to the political speeches? And are we successful in building a Nordic industrial base for defense industry, or are these efforts still quite siloed nationally?
So thank you for that question, and thank you for having me here. When I started at Saab in 2019, that was another world, so to say. And what I recognized then was that Saab, and I would say most of the big defense companies in Europe, were development companies with prototype production. Because there was no one who wanted to buy in big numbers what was developed. And that was the reason behind the European Union creating the European Defence Fund, to keep financing development of high-tech military capabilities without buying them. And then we had the war. And then we started building industrial production capability. And we are still in a very early stages of doing that. Having said that, it's also important to recognize that even though money is flowing in enormous amounts, Saab is growing by over 20% a year. It's not money to buy mass production. For some of our systems, we are going from producing one every 2 weeks to one every day. That's not mass production. Volvo is producing 50,000 lorries a year. Hägglunds is producing a couple of hundred CV90s a year. And if you look back at the American production of Sherman tanks, they produced 49,000 in 3 years. So, I mean, this is where we are. So we are not scaling, we are not mass producing, but we are building a fundamental production capability in Europe if we continue to buy European, or not as we are doing today, buying American or outside Europe, because money is flowing out more than money is flowing in.
So I guess when you start from a low level, those multipliers are impressive, but then if you compare to the level where we really need to get, we're still far off. But do you feel confident on the trajectory that we are on?
Of course, but don't even think that we, even with these numbers, will get mass production in that many products. I would say that at Saab, we have mass production at one item, and that's the ammunition to the Carl Gustaf gun. That's the only one that we actually have mass production today.
Well, that's a good dose of realism. Morten, going to you. So Thermo has quite a unique business model of working through these industrial partnerships and working with, for example, Lockheed Martin on this F-35. So can you reflect on the role of these industrial partnerships in scaling defense spending in the Nordics, and how effective are we promoting these types of partnerships?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to talk a little about how Thermo has been growing because of the cooperation between industry. Denmark, we bought the Saab Dragon jet fighter in the 60s. With that obligation, we actually moved into the air domain, and then we started producing and developing pylons, which we have been producing and developing for decades now. We are now fixed on fighter jets, fixed wing and rotary wing. And also, as you mentioned, Lockheed Martin, we are producing more than 80 parts for the F-35. So industrial cooperation has been a huge part of Therma's, I wouldn't say success, but at least growth so far. The second hand is we've been looking at the US market as our prime market for many years, hence the F-35 and before that the F-16. Now I believe that we have to look more to Europe and also the Nordic countries for closer collaboration between the countries. Time is of the essence, and I think that speed will play a bigger role in the future, and we cannot wait to see when it settles in the US. We have to work closer in the Nordic and the European states and find the right partner, and through collaboration in industry, deliver what is necessary in this situation.
So how do we push the pedal to the metal and effectively accelerate these developments?
Well, there are so many ways of doing it, but if we're looking at kind of like a framework for joint procurements in the Nordic, that could be a way. We have Saab, we have Patria, we have Kongsberg, and Thermo as well. We have a lot of capabilities in Europe and in the Nordic countries, so we can do and we can produce and deliver what we need. We just need to basically do it, in my opinion.
Okay. So let's move on to discussing a bit how we bring the growth of the defense industry and how we can have that also benefit the wider economy in the Nordics. So let's start with you, Lauri. So there is this concept of these spillovers, the idea that when there is innovation in the defense sector, that it also often develops into civilian technologies. So we have gone from having multi-billion space missions to having Teflon pans, for example, as a concrete example. Do you see these types of spillovers building up in this current phase of defense scaling?
I'll come back to the technology question. I couldn't help myself commenting on the mass production point. And of course, I must agree, it is the situation. We talk about peace dividends. For 20 years, Europe didn't invest in the defense, and the underinvestment is like in trillions. It's a matter of opinion. Are we talking about 10 trillion or tens of trillions of underinvestment? So it's not too much of a hooray if we spend 50 billions every once and then. So really that's the reality, and I totally agree. On the tech side, we've been for a long time having this kind of idea that defense technology spills over to civilian technologies. And for the last 10, 15 years, we've been talking about the other way around, so that civilian technologies drive also the innovation in the military side. And that was perhaps prior to 22, the situation. But on the other hand, it is very complex to differentiate between the civil technology and the military technology. If we look at the space-based surveillance and reconnaissance systems, if I look from Finnish perspective, we have a company called ICEYE, and they actually initially started with civilian applications, and they really could map the whole Earth, and suddenly, after 22, the military interest just boomed. So, and now the tech is driving in the space technology in overall, and then that will also, I believe, be a big transformation for the following decades in the civilian side as well. Even if we have more peaceful times, which I don't expect, but even if we would, the space technologies is one sector that really spills over to civilian side as well. And then another one I would just briefly mention is we're talking a lot about drones, and perhaps I might take a bit wider look at the autonomous systems. And there it is not that clear which is driving which. So we've been having these self-driving vehicles and robo-taxis and every kind of autonomous systems. And just now in Ukraine we are seeing a heavy development on autonomous drone systems that might, in the end, influence also the civil systems in the next decade. But it might be the next decade, not this one.
If I may just comment on that, because I agree. And what you see in Ukraine now is they can actually, if you agree, Friedrich, they can actually mass produce drones. But many of the drones they produce, they don't work when they get to the front line. But that's a calculation they have made, at least in my opinion, that a 70% solution is better than chasing a 100% solution, which is in the future, because you cannot foresee what's going to happen in the future. Therefore, you cannot develop the 100% solution now. So I think you have to align on the mentality and the goal for this. What is it? Is it to chase the 100% solution, or is it to change what is good enough, basically?
And I guess that feeds into this also scaling effort to a degree, because the more we chase the perfection, probably that reduces our abilities to scale it. Petri, if you reflect on this civilian military spillover and nexus, how does it look at Bittium? Because you do these hardware solutions for security use that have very probably high resilience requirements, but you also produce hardware for the medical industry. Do you see that on your company level? Is there a positive feedback loop where the resilience requirements, because of the current operating environment, are those also helping to drive up innovation in your civilian side of business?
I think it's a very good question. I think the short answer is yes, and the mechanism works in a way that defense requirements set the bar much higher than any civilian would do by their own. And when we are building the communication systems, when the Russians are deliberately trying to destroy it, and there's a jamming and infrastructure is being destroyed, and any failure in the communication would mean that lives would be lost. I think then we are solving the problems in a very fundamental way. And I don't think it's any feature-specific thing. I think it's more about the engineering discipline and the development velocity. I think these heavy investments that were mentioned earlier, I think they're putting a lot of pressure to accelerate these development programs, and also the requirements to make sure that the critical communication goes through. Those are really high. And but I think that it's also a trust question. So the We have also the medical, and everybody knows the GDPR and the patient data, if there's some kind of leaks happening. So the bar is also increasing on this medical device security. And in general, I think that security in the military communication system is not feature, it's a non-negotiable requirements. And I think this is very important. And of course, there are many civilian technologies like your civil infrastructure and also the data sovereignty, which are the very important we need to keep in mind. So yes, I see that when we are setting the bar high on the defense side, I think it will help us to accelerate the innovation also on the civilian technology side.
That's very interesting. Fredrik, then if you think about also the scaling side of this equation, as you scale the defense side and you have a big ecosystem of all types of subcontractors that are also involved in these projects, how do you see, can this defense spending help to be a catalyst for growth in these other civilian industries directly, or is the feedback a bit more blurry?
Well, I would say that we have been fairly good at Saab at actually doing spin-outs when we have technology that we think that we can use for other means and better, or creating better business models in other companies and other structures. We have been very good at spinning out those kind of technologies at time. What's happened the last couple of years is that Saab now is the biggest engineering company in Sweden. There are more engineers in Saab than in Ericsson and Volvo and all of the other big industrial companies today. I think that is a fundamental base where we show that we can educate, develop engineers that will also them spin out to other employees or creating companies, bringing these knowledges, working with the defense top edge technologies and taking all that knowledge out and using them. That's one thing. The other thing is that I mean, we are, with the orders, with the growth, we are building an ecosystem and we are cherishing our ecosystem to be able to develop our product. Saab is not developing all of these products from the beginning to the end. We are an assembly point and we are good at system integration. But we also need to have those developing the subsystems. So we are creating that ecosystem. Having said that, it's important when you look at the Nordics and you discuss these issues, is that you have to invest in your ecosystems if you want them to be there, meaning that you have to invest in the defense company, in the defense sector in the Nordics, if you want to have also the ecosystems. Otherwise, they are gone. And one of the first things that we had to do when all this happened was to actually go in and invest in our ecosystem to ensure that we had the capabilities we needed when the orders starting to come in.
Well, if I can ask a follow-up question on that, and that's maybe a segue to the also final phase of this discussion, is how do we build that kind of an ecosystem, not just on the national levels, all of us separately, but a truly integrated Nordic ecosystem where this kind of industrial growth does gain momentum?
I would say that we now have a golden opportunity with all of the Nordic countries being members of NATO. Not discussing the political turbulence of NATO right now, but we are there. We are in the same military operational area, and that is a fundament for developing joint military capabilities that we haven't done before due to the fact that we have been non-aligned in Sweden and Finland, and Norway and Denmark have been part of NATO for many years. So this with time, this understanding with time will, I think, drive the fact that we need, from a military capacity perspective, develop these ecosystems so that we are ready to fight with the assets that we have. But we are just in the beginning.
Morten, would you like to chip in here from the Danish perspective? like how would you like the Nordic cooperation on building this ecosystem to look like? What are some couple concrete steps that you would like to see next?
The most concrete step I can think of is, again, some joint procurements, kind of like having a framework for what we want to have throughout the Nordics, in the NATO as well. That would be my best solution, actually. Having the same platforms throughout the country, then we can share more than we do now. We can share training, we can share MRO, we can share developing parts. We can, there's not a limit to what we can share if we create something in the Nordics or have the same platforms throughout the Nordics.
Well, before we give the audience the opportunity to ask some questions, let's give the opportunity also for the Finnish perspective here. So if you want to take a stance on this same question of like, okay, how do we build a Nordic really defense industrial ecosystem? What's the wish list here?
I would kind of close in on three different angles this topic. And firstly, if I look 10 years back, I would be surprised to see what is happening in the military operational or has happened in the military operational side. So the cooperation there has really struck at least me that how close cooperation Finland and Sweden and all the Nordics have been able to do. And there's been the second part of that would be the joint procurement or joint material acquisition or that kind of capabilities. And there we kind of have had our challenges. Within Nordefco, we haven't quite achieved too much, I would say. And we've had some implementation challenges over there as well. So,
can you reflect on those?
But that could be. But we should also in that streamline align our material policy objectives and our national interest and I must admit it's not easy. So, but that is of course one thing we could go forward with. But thirdly, I'm just thinking that the Nordic defense market I don't think that kind of suffices for the defense industry in the area. So at least in Finland and Sweden, I know we're very export-oriented, and Denmark also. You need to have also the sales outside of the Nordics. So the Nordic, even though it is an important market, it is not the only market is really important. So perhaps we should be jointly advocating for the European defense market to be more open and what could be done there. And what we haven't seen in the past decade too much is the industrial cooperation you initially asked for. And I don't blame Saab, I wouldn't blame any company in the Nordics, but just to state the observation that we haven't had too much industrial cooperation.
Petri, would you like to add anything here?
Maybe continuing from there, and maybe what I would like to see is more in the Nordics is that we have a lot of individual companies which are stars in their own vertical, and how we would form strategic alliances or industrial partnerships in a way that, because if you look that we have a huge kind of defense players in the US and in the Europe, but how do we create such entities in the Nordics? And I'm not talking about kind of structural ownerships things, but rather looking kind of how we would become stronger by working together. And this through these partnerships, I think that we have a chance to become a stronger defense players in the Nordics.
And what's holding us back?
Nothing.
Nothing. That's good.
We are traveling every week and trying to talk with the other companies.
So let's now open the floor if there are any questions in the audience. So we'll take maybe a batch of 3. And if you can, when you get your turn to introduce yourself, keep your questions short, so a question, not a comment, and also note if you're wanting to address any of the speakers individually. Do we have any questions? There we have one. Any other? Well, wait.
My name is Seppo Rantanen. Done my military service long time ago. you're talking about cooperation and we're talking about Nordic cluster. And when we are talking about cluster, there has to be very clear lines of specialization that this is our area, this is so forth. Has there been any that kind of discussion or planning in Nordic level that there are clear clusters for each country's industry?
And then Rasmus, you had your...
Yes, Rasmus Jerndahl, working at Scania. I have a question for Fredrik Hassel. Are you working with any kind of venture setup to make use of the ideas that other engineers within Saab has to ensure that you can commercialize the ideas that maybe not fit directly into your portfolio today?
Okay, well, Fredrik, do you want to start on that?
I'm not an expert on that, but I know that we are even setting up startups within Saab, bringing young people together with an object to develop something, with the support of the big company, but staying outside all of the management systems and all of that to really use the creativity of these people, developing things that could go into our defense productions. They are, for example, experimenting with how to 3D print things and also developing products for the civil market at the same time. I don't know whether if that was the whole answer, but that was a answer.
Well, let's also explore the answers to the first question. So on the question of, okay, so if we create this Nordic system, perhaps it doesn't make sense that we have everyone making separately the same thing, but we need to do this clustering and specialization, and the question whether we have actually explored what that could look like.
I think it's easier said than done, especially when you have at least 3 major companies in the Nordic who are competing in many areas. It's hard for Saab to stop doing something in order for, let's say, Kongsberg to do it. We are a business, we have to sustain. So it's easier said than done, but having that cluster, maybe not just looking at the Nordic, but let's use the Baltic Sea as an example. You can take the Baltic states, you can take Poland, you can take Germany as well, and then at least you have something that some of us can sustain on in the long term. That's a huge market, huge investments. How it's done, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't presume to know how it's done. So that's a answer for you as well.
Yeah, I must agree that it is a challenge to have a cluster. And in Finland, I believe we have over 300 companies that identify themselves as defense industry companies, and Sweden is in the same numbers as is Denmark. So we're talking about over 1,000 companies, and how could we possibly align those? However, we have some accomplishments in the area as well. If we look at some narrow targets, for instance, in Finland we have quite good maritime cluster. And now that we've been having these icebreaker deals abroad with the US and Canada, it is about actually the whole maritime cluster that is getting the benefit from these deals, because it is a huge supply chain back there and not totally domestic either.
Yeah, I understand this cluster thing is not something, it's very simple, but I think that like in Finland there's 300 to 400 kind of defense companies, and they grew in total like in average 40% year on year, and in total I think the revenue was 4 billion, and so if the Finland, for example, is helping to export these product or companies to foreign outside of the Finland, it's the huge effort in a way that it would be helpful to align somehow this by the sector, and of course it really depends on the companies to have this discussion. It's not easy for the kind of governments to set strict rules for the companies. This is your playground and you cannot do anything else. But I believe that I think the board would be needed, this industrial coordination of and from the government side to support it, as well as the companies would need to kind of realize that they actually have this broader role rather than just looking on this their own.
Thank you. Fredrik?
Well, when it comes to clusters, I think it's important to understand the success of clusters is when you have a bottom-up perspective, not a top-down perspective. Clusters develop over time. We have an fighter cluster in south of Stockholm, in Linköping. We have a radar cluster or microwave cluster in Gothenburg. And these have developed over decades and decades of time. When they started in Linköping 1937, who thought that this would be the development where we are today, that Sweden is one of the few countries in the world that actually can develop a modern fighter? So clusters is a bottom-up. Then it's about cooperation. And then you can cooperate on different tier levels. And I think what we should strive for is to have an ecosystem with maybe tier 2, tier 3 producers. Because if we do that in Nordic and in Europe, then we'll build an industrial base also for the big companies to cooperate within. But political decisions saying they should do that and they should do this, and that is more a Paris view on how to develop things.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to end. The kind of like vision where we can strive for while keeping in mind the trade-offs that we need to balance while we're trying to get there. So thank you for your reflections.
Thank you for really stimulating discussions, and now it's time to go out and build those clusters during the coffee. So now the coffee will be served on the second floor, and there are 3 stations for coffee. Also, one is in the restaurant area, so please go out a little bit so that we don't have a queue here on the inside. So that's my small hope. And let's be back here at 10 minutes to 3. Thank you. Där är en Okay. Is everyone... we are still waiting for a few people to come in, but as soon as you have found your seats, we will start again. I hope you had good discussions during the coffee break, and now it's time to continue then with our next panel, where we will delve into the tech scene a little bit more. Our moderator for this panel will be Krista Korelin. She's the Vice President at Nordea, working with digital sales and engagement. So welcome, Krista. The stage is yours to destroy, I was going to say.
To destroy.
Hopefully not.
Let's hope not. I don't know how your morning has been, but I don't feel destructive. Good afternoon, everyone, also from my side. Really, really nice to see you here, and I hope you had a good break. The next panel will take us through the tech landscape of the Nordics, and we will be looking at it from a couple of different viewpoints. We have really magnificent panelists today, representing both the sort of startup and scale-up companies, growth companies, big incumbent corporations, and then we also have representation from the academia, which is bringing us the sort of outside in view to the tech landscape. We will be answering some of the questions that you have seen in the program, which is, are we really as competitive as we think we are here in the Nordics when it comes to global scale of technology and digitalization and AI? We also will be talking a bit about independence in terms of the technical capabilities that we have in the Nordics, and should we be more independent? And of course, the collaboration, which has been the sort of theme for today also earlier. But now I would like to introduce our panelists to the stage, please, if you all come here. We have Jessica Öberg from Competitiveness. We have Lars Persson from Research Institute Industrial Economics, Mikko Karikytö from Ericsson, and then Milja Kalliosaari from IQM Quantum Computing. Excellent. Maybe just to warm up, so to speak. And the warm-up in the Finnish way means that we go straight to the most difficult question that we have on the panel. So that is kind of how we sort of started with a bang. So straight to the point, if we talk about competitiveness, we know that currently a lot of the leading technology companies are US-based, they are not necessarily here in the Nordics. If we look at AI, if we look at infrastructure, if we look at telecom, how competitive are we really on a global scale when it comes to the technological capabilities that we have in the Nordics at the moment? And what are the areas where we are competitive and where are we kind of falling behind? So that would be the first one. Can I trust you, Lars, to take the outside-in view and kick us off today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something that I have been...
Yeah.
I should have this one. So I've been studying this for many, many years. So let me start in the Draghi report, which I guess most of you know about, and showing that US was far ahead of EU and Europe in high tech, but that's not the case in the Nordic. If you compare with the Nordics, we're much more like the US. So if you look, for instance, in the investments in intangible assets, which is a big part of high tech, Sweden in particular, but also Finland and other Nordic countries are actually scoring higher. If you look at the financing of high tech, also there, the Nordic country is at US level. Patenting, you could see that in, for instance, Finland and Sweden in digital economy is very high, Denmark in pharma, etc. So things are looking historically in high tech very good for the Nordic sector. However, as you said, if you look at the AI side, it seems like we spoke about football, a little late on the ball here. So we were lagging behind a little, but looking now, you could see that there is actually big improvements. So I think that the kind of Nordic is actually competing. One of the problem is, if you look at this Mag 7 firms, the big tech, the language models, etc., there it's a problem being in small countries like the Nordic regions. So I think there is problems that we could do something about. And I think, again, it was Erik who mentioned this about the credibility of policy. I think here is a crucial thing, and which has been, even though Nordic scores very high, I think we have a problem with the time now. Everyone is kind of promising things and not delivering, etc. So I think, for instance, energy supply, telecom, etc. Here it's crucial that the Nordic is actually credible committing. This goes back to the Magna Carta 1215 or something like that, where you could show that when you have this credibility of not kind of changing and taking the proceeds, you will have more investments. The second thing I would bring up where we have some weakness, I think, is for the small young firms. So the big firms are doing well. We have seen Saab, and we have big firms, Nokia, Ericsson, etc., that are doing well. But the small firms have problems with the scale. We need to help them with computer capacity, access to data, etc. And I think that's another thing where we could actually improve on the scale a little. So I could continue for a long period, but I will stop here. So.
I think those were very interesting points also from a point of view that there are areas and niches of technology, but then there's also something related to the company structure and governance and things like that. Jessica, you represent Compitech, who is selling resilience, so to speak. You have a lot of dual-use technology. What's your view on this?
Well, I think we have a lot that we can still develop when it comes to dual use, because I see that we can share technologies, we can share tools, methods, and processes with each other, where we are not competitors amongst each other. And I take as an example for Compitech, we are working heavily and been involved in the defense area, the military defense for many years. And now we can see that the autonomy technology are just as well used in the mining segment. And mining is also something that is really important for the Nordic part and in Sweden in particular. So to see that you can collaborate, share information, share the cost of investments with segments that do not compete on your market. I think that is something that we really need to look into to be able to stay competitive, because it goes so fast. And if each and every segment is going to invest their own, it's going to take too long time. So we need to be smart and work together, I think.
I think working smarter, not harder is a very good theme. I think, Mikko, you represent a large corporate with a very sort of proud and advanced heritage in telecom in Ericsson. Is collaboration and is that a thing for a corporate?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me here. The whole telecommunication stack is actually a result of collaboration. And a proof point about that when we talk about leadership and what should Europe do to become a leader? Well, we are the leader when it comes to mobile. Just forgive me, this Nokia and Ericsson, Finland and Sweden, it's almost absurd that there is no US champion in mobile technology. And this is not just some technology, this is probably one of the most fundamental and important technology for humankind. Why? Electricity covers 91% of the population on the planet. Telecom networks cover 97%. So you will have reception on your phone more likely than finding a plug where you can charge it, anywhere you go on this planet. This is absolutely like a miracle, the mobile networks. And talking about AI, talking about clouds, talking about the hyperscalers. I mean, the hyperscalers, the clouds, I mean, they're someone else's computer. They're computers. But the mobile technology that connects every device and everything that we have in our lives and in our businesses and in our most critical services nowadays, health and safety, public safety, in Finland, for example, the public safety networks, it is actually connected over the mobile networks. So we should be very proud and recognize this leadership we have worldwide, actually, in this technology. And sometimes I think that we forget it. We forget it, and as Europeans, we're so open-minded somehow that we forget that actually we have two critical champions here. Let's make sure that this technology prevails and actually Europe has the leadership going forward.
I think that was very well put. That, how did you say, we are already the best or something like this. That's a good starting point. But I think also when we look at the kind of competitive angle, of course, in order to keep competitive and build new areas of competitiveness, I think it's great that we have variety and versatile technology landscape. Milja, you represent one of the key growth areas in our technological capabilities, quantum computing. What's your view on our competitiveness and collaboration that would then help that?
Well, in quantum, we are competitive. I think EU is very well positioned to actually lead. Just looking at the EU quantum market, I think we have put around 11 billion euros during the last 5 years to quantum. We have companies that can actually deliver these systems, which is rather rare. So when it comes to, for example, delivered systems, IQM is one of the global leaders here. And Finland is one of the few countries that can actually build these systems on its own land. So, for example, superconducting systems, Finland has history in these systems. We have done basic research in low temperature physics since 1960s. And I think here collaboration that was highlighted is one of the key factors for success. So we have the academia, we have RTOs like VTT, we have companies that can work together with this ecosystem. And through this we have created, well, for example, critical infrastructure around quantum. So we have capabilities to actually build our own chips. We have the talent base, and we now are starting to have the end users, at least in the academia side. Of course, the question is how can we commercialize and actually scale these companies and capabilities? And that's the critical question we need to solve.
I think you brought us well to the one of the key areas, at least here in Finland, I think. Maybe in Sweden you have been a bit better at this commercialization point of view, but I think something that we often talk about in Finland is that we have a really good base, we have really good research, innovation, technical capabilities, but then as for how do we take this to the market, especially on a global scale? I think there is, you highlighted that very well, that is something where we probably need to work together more. Maybe just a continuation of that topic, because I think we can't say that IQM would be a startup. It's, reaching to APO and your recent funding does not, it's not a startup anymore. It's a scale-up or growth company, however you want to call it. Maybe even a unicorn one day. But then how do you see the collaboration between, let's say, the incumbents, like let's say Ericsson, a massive global giant? Is that something that would help us in that, or do you see that as a more kind of like two separate paths?
I think as the technology matures, of course, collaboration with the wider industry is necessary, and we are already starting to see at least the first signs of that. But I would ask, what is the step needed before that? Because usually that's exactly the value of that that we need to cover first to mature these technologies. And I think here what Finland has, for example, done is quite creative and something that we should maybe look on EU level as well. So companies like IQM have worked with RTOs like VTT together to actually develop future technologies through innovative public procurement. So these two stakeholders have developed new technologies. So for example, a new quantum computer, a new system that didn't yet exist. And through that, companies like IQM have pushed their tech roadmaps forward. RTOs like VTT have gained new IP capabilities, talent, know-how. And through these type of collaborations that can be supported by governments, for example, we can push the technology closer to the market. And then when the time is right, when the technology is right, we can move forward with the industry partners. But I think the necessary step is what happens between the actual R&D phase and the commercialization phase.
Any thoughts on that from the Swedish point of view or from Ericsson point of view? How have you bridged that gap?
Well, I think I need to go back and say, okay, 4 years ago or before the war in Ukraine, there wasn't much money or anyone investing into the defense area, not as we see today. Today we have the money and we need to find ways to collaborate and get use of the startup. And what we're saying, okay, maybe not startup, but scale up, and how can we get those scale ups to stay in the Nordic region and not go for the money that is maybe abroad. And I think one way to do it is to really see what we contribute with from being established in the defense area for such a long time. We know the customers, we know the operation, we know the procurement processes, we know the legislation. that's what we can bring to the table to make it easier, to smooth it, because the end game is to really get the solutions to the end customers and be used. And I think that's something where we can collaborate even better, I think, without just buying each other or make sure we end up in the same company, but collaborating and bring different things to the table and make sure we move forward.
So, if you look at the Swedish system, I think it's interesting to see it as like a ecosystem. So you have a very vivid financial market with venture capital, seed capital, but also a liquid stock market, and you have an ownership market that works very well. So for instance, we made a report which I presented here 2 years ago, SNS report, and we look at the creative destruction process in Sweden. So where is the productivity created, in which firms? And Schumpeter and now Agion et al. Get this Nobel Prize for this process where new firms coming in, firms which are old and not have new good ideas is forced out, etc. So what we see in Sweden is what I call productive preemption and creative destruction. So you could see that most of the productivity gains the last 20 years is actually firms that are bought by bigger firms, and as affiliates, they are actually growing and creating a lot of productivity. So I think, again, what's important is that the institutions are in place, both the formal and informal, to calming this productive and creative destruction. And that's collaboration, but it's also different kind of ownership changes that are crucial for the kind of Swedish success in this area.
Maybe just an anecdotal example from, I think, what succeeds in Finland especially well is that I work in cybersecurity of these networks, so I'm leading the product security for the group. And so, of course, I monitor and get involved in any country wanting to enhance their security of their 5G infrastructure, for example. For some reason, only Finland has ever succeeded to run a 5G cybersecurity hackathon multiple times since 2019 with Traficom, Oulu University, the Nokia Ericsson, and a few others. They have had this ambition to drive cybersecurity and introduce students and invite hackers all over the planet to come and try and see the technology. Yes, there are German and UK and American approaches, but they're different and they're not that collaborative in their nature. And I don't know why, but and it's not that we have bias to just play ball with the Nordics here. I mean, we'd be open to work with anyone, but for some reason the Finns have been quite successful in that.
I think it's interesting. We have heard now many examples of collaboration, whether it's smaller companies with bigger companies, whether it's kind of public sector and private sector and within the countries. Yet again, when we look at the sort of global landscape, we're not very independent when it comes to technology. So we are very reliant on certain US-based, whether they're chip companies like Nvidia, whether it's AI leaders like Anthropic, whether it's cloud companies such as AWS and or AWS and Microsoft. So all this collaboration and kind of the goodwill that we have and some good examples as well on how we collaborate. Can we use that to be more independent? And maybe I'd also like to understand kind of from your point of view, do you see the dependence that we have on US-based technology a problem? Or is it just a fact of life that we live in an interconnected world? Who wants to lead us with that?
I'll be happy then. I think, so firstly, anyone at this time and age need to be, of course, concerned and mindful about where your security is coming from, where your trust in your systems are coming from. So you need to be mindful about what you're buying from who. I mean, obviously. But then at the same time, we need to recognize that more than being concerned about, if we look at the tech stack, we have the cloud, we have AI, we have the connectivity. You need these three to have a good future, kind of. AI is quite uninteresting if you can't connect to it, and also if you don't have clouds where to run it, it's quite uninteresting also. So it's this kind of triangle. Now, should we focus in thinking, can we replicate everything that US or China have made before? Or should we focus on those areas where we already have the championship, where we already have the winning combinations? And then, unfortunately, there's a cruel fact. And look at the world. 5G base stations, a simple measurement, 5G base stations, half of them are in China. Half of the 5G base stations are in China. Europe has significantly less than China altogether. US is having good go also. We talk about the actual standalone 5G. India has 83% coverage. Europe has something 2%. China is fully covered. US is fully covered. So if we, and now, again, we are not connecting only mobile phones and making sure that your summer cottage has good connectivity when you work from remote. No, actually connecting robots in factories to remove cables, connecting the most sophisticated industrial processes with 5G. And Europe is lagging behind and going to lag even more behind if this trend continues. And I think that there's something that we don't recognize. And maybe we Nordics should be a little bit more vocal about this, that there's something we have a leadership in. Why don't we leverage that?
That is a very good question. Do you, again, an outside-in view, do we leverage our strengths, and or what are the hindrances?
Yeah. So let me start with saying that the Nordic has a history of being kind of champions in standardization. So the owner and CEO of Cadillac, 1885 or something, said something like, "It's only two people that I take off my hat to. One is the president of the USA, and the second is Measurement Johansson." And who is Measurement Johansson? In Swedish is Mått Johansson, born in Eskilstuna, and he was actually developing the first kind of measurement gauge blocks that made it possible to have scale production. And more important, actually having decentralization. So you could actually have small firms in like Gnosjö and Småland delivering to these big firms. And that was, he was then hired by Henry Ford, and he was kind of the brain behind that. And then, as you said, Ericsson and Nokia with the NMT and GSM was actually doing that again. And I think this is a kind of lesson. We have this kind of skill in being precise and cooperating, etc. And that has made the Nordic, I think, successful, and I agree with your view on Ericsson and Nokia and other firms around that. So it's really a kind of a important case to have this ability to actually make worldwide standards. And I think we could do it again. I don't know where. I'm not smart enough to do that, understand that, but there is different kind of steps here, and probably we could do it again. And I think that's a kind of key competitive advantage. But I would also say that one of the problems is that now with all the regulations in EU, you have a lot of stakeholders that want this and this and this and this. And in economics, we call it this create a coordination failure. So basically, you have, before it was very few people, few agencies, now it's a lot, and you have to kind of coordinate that. If you want to build something, you have to have the health authority, environment authority, competition authority, everyone. And no one is coordinating that. So that's something which I think is crucial. Could the Nordics actually do that, then we could have a competitive advantage. So I think these kind of things actually are more important when people believe. So having these things in place, the institution work, then we have a lot of good people out there that could kind of capitalize on that.
I won't add on to that, but I want to reflect upon what you were saying. Are we too dependent on US, or should we be more independent? And I think I want to answer yes to both of them. And to just elaborate a little bit about it, I think, yeah, we have chosen a few areas in the world where we are focusing or where we are strong on the market, where we collaborate. But we also need to do our own kind of resilience work for ourselves and look into what do we really need to have for ourselves, and where do we really need to stay day collaborating, because we are too small of a market for the products that we are producing. So we need to be out there to sell them to the market around globally. And if we want to do that, we also need to have an ecosystem that is spread outside of the Nordics. But still, coming back to then, what is really the core business for us, and how do we protect that? I think we all need to do that kind of homework to see where we can collaborate and what we really need to develop ourselves.
I think there was please, Milja.
Well, maybe I can add on. Of course, we need to focus on areas where we are actually competitive, where we have the competitive edge. But then we also need to take risks. And for example, in quantum, we already see that Europe has capabilities, but of course this technology is still developing, and we're not sure yet which technology or which company will be the winning one. This is the risk we need to take. But then again, if we have this opportunity, why not to take it? And especially in the times marked by the return of geopolitics and strong industrial policy, everyone else is doing this. For example, in the US, they have Genesis Mission, DARPA Quantum Benchmark Initiative. These are a few examples. On EU member state level, they are also starting to put on these type of programs. Just for example, high-tech agenda of Germany. They are looking into ways in which how to scale these technologies. EU would have the necessary scale to actually build these champions, but then we need to take risks. And this is not maybe the best area where institutions like EU have branded themselves, but we have the capabilities, so it's worth taking the risk.
I think you touched upon the long-standing joke that probably has been also said on this stage many times, that when US innovates, China replicates, and then EU regulates. And we've heard it many times here, but I think you touched upon a good point of that risk-taking aspect is something we haven't really branded ourselves in, because we've had a lot of regulation, and then we are very sort of good citizens, right? We want to obey the regulation and be compliant, which is exactly the way we should be. But I was thinking, if we are compliant and secure, yet we are innovative on a technology, and we have really good educational baseline and institutions, we are stable economies, why aren't we not exporting that? Why don't we sell that globally? Because that sounds like if US sells innovation and China sells scale, why don't we sell kind of like trust and ethical tech and resilient societies? Could that be the next export hit from the Nordics? What's your view on that? That was a bold question, but your turn is soon. You can also ask one.
Well, absolutely. I think that is also a big part of our DNA, also as like how we see ourselves as tech leaders globally. You know, we see that we build the trust into the technology, we build the security there. That's our, why we win in the market is, and I think according to marketing, our Finnish friends are doing the same. Yeah. I think it's quite natural, and also because how we are now, we're here in Finland, so how we are located, it usually gives us a DNA of being a little bit prepared and not giving up on all our good defense systems that we have had. So definitely we have potential there. I think it is also coming now. If we look at the technology we are developing, 5G, and soon then moving on to 6G, etc. Security and trustworthiness and different kind of assurance mechanisms are actually integral part of that technology. So it is making your business transactions and your social media life and any other part of your life more secure and more trusted, more safe for persons, more safe for businesses. So I think that we actually are kind of exporting that trust and security mindset, but definitely we could do a little bit more in branding that also. I see just a personal observation. I think that sometimes I see a lot of snake oil coming from the other side of the Atlantic and a very kind of big and bold messages, and then we're a little bit humble because we're not 100% sure if it's 100% secure. So we're a little bit too honest, I guess, in the marketing at least.
I would also look into defense and security when it comes to the Nordic collaboration. We're seeing that technology is marked by stronger and stronger securitization on a global scale. And then again, we understand that, for example, national defense forces should collaborate more with technology companies to actually innovate and create new capabilities. Here, and I think in general, in every defense and security discussion, the shared value phase and trust are key ingredients for success. So why not do it in Nordic scale to collaborate, for example, on critical infrastructure to create new applications for quantum computing, for AI, and learning how can we actually succeed in this. I know that on national level, different member states and different Nordic countries are already doing this, but it would make sense to do it together.
I agree, and I think everything that I'm coming back to collaboration, but also leadership, because I think maybe sometimes we are too humbled to really lean in and say, this is what we have. Just going to give you two examples of, I think, great collaboration. One is a company or a collaboration between very different companies coming together in spherical AI to make make sure that we will be able to develop what we need from a Nordic point of view. And that, of course, we can develop even further outside of this. And then we see how we can, from not just a Nordic but a European point of view, look into how we make our operations more secure with cyber threat intelligence. When you are the good guys trying to hit into and find the weaknesses in systems, and we see that we can really do a difference here. So I think it's more of combining the resilience pieces that we have into something that could really be put on the global market.
So I guess I could take the outside perspective again. That's a nice position. Will come next year also. So if you look from kind of the economics research point of view, trust is something which Nordic scores super high. Basically, everyone knows that, but it's also you named trustworthiness, which is the other side of the game. And I think there is a very interesting study there called the wallet game. So basically, it's a lot of researchers that drop their wallet all over the places, hotels, posts, etc. And they have some indication how to get hold of the so-called owner of it. And if you look at that, it's kind of amazing to see the Nordics there. They are sending back the wallets. And I think that the key elements here is both this trust, which make you invest, you kind of dare to do that, but you also need to be trustworthy. So I think we really, really need to keep that reputation because it's really, really useful. There is some studies showing on multinationals from the Nordics that they are good at kind of having the same level of decentralization in Sweden or in Finland and outside. Not fully, but I think that's the key. They are not successfully fully. So in some way, the decentralization is really trust and trustworthiness. And I think that's our really, you said, goal in some way. But we can't export it fully. So I think there we could do something a little more. I had a lunch discussion here and learned about some firms here, and they described that it's not easy all the time. So I think there is something we have to realize that it's difficult to export and kind of do that, and we could probably do it better.
Just a comment on the Nordic trustworthiness. I think I sometimes joke when I meet policymakers and I speak to a lot of governments about the security of 5G and the trust factors also. And then, when we go to technical discussions and we start talking about who is attacking these networks, and these are oftentimes so-called advanced persistent threat actors, so nation-state-backed organizational, organized crime, but then organized intelligence services who are trying to get into the networks and steal whatever you have there, your information and your money and whatnot. But funnily or not, we see a lot of APT actors coming from East and West and from many places, but we never find a Finnish or Swedish APT actor in any of these networks. Like how come? I think that we should actually make it a brand for ourselves. We are not attacking your networks, you know. Almost anyone else is.
I think that's a perfect sales pitch. We do not attack your networks. But if we think about the Nordic expert and we think about the keywords that were mentioned, resilience, trust, you know, we are the good guys, and then we have the really advanced technology. I see that could be a new Nordic export, and all the collaboration that we have here on the ground obviously is what we need to make that happen. I'm being conscious of time, so let's give our audience an opportunity to ask a question if somebody would. We have a couple of minutes, so before we say the closing words. Is there anything you would like to ask from the panel? I saw there a hand.
Yes, hi, I'm Jared Hi, my name's Jared from Gunvor. We make batteries here in Finland. Wow, that's loud, okay. We've got someone from quantum, and we've got someone from sort of mobile networks. From what I've understood, quantum could pose one of the next biggest risks to our networks and sort of our security. We've got two experts or people that work for those companies on stage. I'd like to hear from you perhaps what the timeline for that is and how disruptive that could be in the future. A big question for you.
That's a very good question. I think many actors are wondering that as we speak, and this is why big governments are putting a lot of funding into this. Well, when it comes to breaking, for example, RSA codes and encryption, I think we're talking about, well, it depends on who you ask, but realistically maybe 10 years. Of course, if someone figures out how to do better error correction, a new algorithm, that changes the game. That's part of working with innovation. Before that, we get a lot of different applications for industry, for research, and I think those are the exciting applications that we should look forward to in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, I guess the doomsday question that always comes up in, the hype question is that when does someone or some party, some nation have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer so that they have hoarded all the data for decades and then they can just open it, read all your messages and secrets and whatsoever. So for that reason, of course, from technology point of view, what we're doing is that firstly, of course, first steps taking in the standardization and otherwise implementing the post-quantum crypto protocols wherever need be, but also something that we see very important for many reasons, not only the PQC question, is the being crypto agile. So actually having ability to swap your crypto suites on the go, because there's always trust issues with whoever came up with the algorithm. Did they tell you everything about it? So that kind of agility is of course important. Then what we see also, and this is going a little bit more down to earth back again, is that people don't always have visibility. What crypto are they running even? When we scan a network, we find out that there's so many. So actually bringing visibility to what you're having there is kind of the first step on this multi-step issue, challenge, landscape.
Thank you. Let's take one more. There's a hand that I saw.
Yes, hello, thank you. I'm Lasse Korin from Aktia Bank. Actually, I have a question to Lars. If you look at, it's a broad question regarding investments. If you look at productive investments as share of GDP, and in Sweden, and unproductive, that's intangible investments and investments in machinery and production equipment, so investments excluding construction. You have the highest share in the world, I'm correct, good. So how on earth did you achieve that in Sweden?
That's a secret, but I will share it. So, I think again, it's really I get so excited with this interesting.
We're amongst family here, so you can speak on the microphone when you reveal the secret.
Yeah. So it's a puzzle to me also. I think some of the key ingredients is, as I said, this broadly the ecosystem. So we have had the luck to build up
couple of institutions that are crucial. We have discussed the informal ones that we share with other Nordic countries about trust and trustworthiness, which is key because in intangible assets, it's really, you can't have the collateral. So that's the reason why it works good in the Nordic. Then I think maybe the other Nordic countries lack this kind of financial and system, which is much more elaborated in Sweden as for now. And I think these combination of the formal institution and the informal would be an answer to this.
Thank you very much to our panelists today. I think we've had really good insights, and thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge and experience with us, and thank you for good questions from the audience. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's time for our last panel, but I know it's difficult to sit down, so now you can stand up a little bit and move around so you get energy for the last 45 minutes and the last discussion here on stage. And while you are doing that, you were actually not asked to talk, just to stand up. But that's good. Let me now introduce the last panel moderator, Torsten Fagerholm, a journalist and columnist at the newspaper Hufvudstadsbladet. Welcome, Torsten, and now it's your time to kind of get them to sit down again.
Okay, yes. Well, please have a seat. If you can last for 45 more minutes until the cocktails. Let's hope so. So, I'm Torsten Fagerholm, work for Hufvudstadsbladet, the main Swedish daily in Finland. And actually, to understand the present and also navigate the future, I think it often helps by looking to the past. So, I like to go way, way back to 1998, when a Swedish songwriter put pen to paper and expressed the following words. It's all about money. It's all about dum dum da da dum dum dum. Maybe you heard that one. Yeah. If you heard it, you don't forget it. So maybe it's not timeless poetry necessarily. Maybe it's not worthy of a Nobel Prize. But I think this song, All About Money, was in fact nominated nominated for a Swedish Grammy in 1998. But all humor aside, I think there's a great kernel of truth in this lyric, actually. When you boil down things to the essentials, to the bare core, it's all about money. So to talk about money, I'd like to invite our panel here today. Please come up to the stage, Annika, Sille, Adam, and Fredrik. So then, Annika, you're from the legal world, know all things about laws and regulations, to bringing us that perspective today. And then we have Sille from Estonia, from the Estonian state-owned investment fund, specialized in defense, as I understand. And another perspective, the financial bit, is represented by Adam from Nasdaq, the Swedish stock exchange. And then we have Fredrik from Brussels, from an independent think tank. Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole bit there, but... So, glad to have you here. So the aim from this panel is to talk about how Finland, Sweden, and the larger Baltic area can build together and make greater use of economic partnerships. So let's find out. But as soon as you talk about partnerships and collaboration, as many panels have done today, I think it's quite easy to have a collaboration as sort of a vibe, a loose thing, where you agree on a general level, you feel good, but actual commitments, they create results, contracts, real sort of in-depth collaboration. So let's talk about that. Let's try to focus on the real substance, cut to the chase. So if you've done your homework, as I hope you have, you read Hufvudstadsbladet today. In the editorial, it's, for all you Swedish speakers, it's en nordisk superstat kräver mindre snack, mer verkstad. So
I read it.
You read it, great. And if you haven't, it's too late now. But anyway, a Nordic superstate requires less talk and more action. That's sort of the main gist of this text. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And really, to start things off, I think we're maybe selling ourselves a bit short in the Nordics, or that's what I like to claim, that we're sort of scoring an own goal sometimes, because really we're competing against each other in terms of FDI, foreign direct investments, in many ways. And if we would do it differently, then we would have a single market of maybe 28 million inhabitants, and maybe pitch that to Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. And somebody wise once said that if you're not having a seat at the table, you're probably part of the menu. So we risk ending up on the menu unless we really claim ourselves a seat at the table of the G20, etc. So if I may be so bold now to present a vision to you, to your panelists, and we'll get your feedback on that. What if the Nordic countries were to form a sort of single superstate or an Arctic superpower? What's your spontaneous views of that?
Spontaneously, I love it. I'm all for more collaboration, but I'm as long as it doesn't bring more regulation. So I'm not into another layer of domestic Nordic EU. I think that we need to tear down. But
right.
I love the idea.
Okay, what about you, Sille?
Thank you. I guess we have been moving in that direction actually for decades, especially if, I'm coming from Estonia. When I look at the financial sector, then we see Swedish banks in Estonia. Or the retail and grocery sector, I see Nordic retail chains dominating the market. So, it has been happening for decades already. And now, spontaneously, I think we are suffering from this yes, but syndrome. Yes, I think that's a good idea. Why not? Let's do it. But what if we win from it? What if we, we still do better than others in this super great Nordic powerhouse? So we still need to come over this yes, but syndrome, I think.
How about you, Adam?
Well, yes, but no, no. Jokingly aside, I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it's not an idea against Europe. I think it's an idea for Europe, and I think what we're seeing now is a sense of frustration across Europe. I think there's a sense of frustration which will lead to action. And that action is now taking place in many different ways. You see now the most recent initiative in Europe called the E6, which is, and then you have the coalition of the willing, and you have different initiatives of trying to work around this concept of having 27 governments agree. And I think, at the same time, from a Nordic perspective, we're standing on the sideline watching this, and we're trying to navigate what will be the impact of this. I think if we came together and defined how we will cooperate and how we will make this region more attractive for Europe, but also for international investment overall, I think it would be a fantastic development. Not only from a capital markets perspective, but on all different layers, I think we would benefit from this. And then, just on the topic of FDI, it's interesting that you mentioned FDI, because only in Europe, only in the Nordics, we have 4 different interpretations of FDI, which is, again, an example of why didn't we just cooperate from the beginning, Because at the end of the day, we're cooperating around the fence. We have the same ambition. We have the same purpose with FDI, but still we came up with 4 different interpretations. And that is not particularly useful for this region overall. So from that perspective, let's start with the word FDI and start defining it in one common way. That would make it easier for international investors to reach this region in a more efficient way overall.
Good. How about you, Fredrik, looking from Brussels? How do you see this vision?
I think it's a terrible idea. Someone needs to say it, right?
Absolutely.
No, I mean, I think everyone can see the case for more Nordic cooperation, but competition is part of cooperation. And, if we didn't compete about attracting FDI, that FDI may go somewhere else in the world instead. If Ericsson and Nokia hadn't competed neck to neck in the 1990s with each other, no one of them would have created the fantastic companies that eventually created. So I think we have this notion, and I come from a country which is a federal country, and I can tell you, Wallonia and the Flanders, they are not the best of friends. And it doesn't help to build scale, or it doesn't help to add more people or more region, especially not when you live in an area which is going sort of beyond that old industrial logic of a increasing return to scale. The bigger you come, the more money you have, or the more powerful you're going to be. Sort of what we're seeing right now is that the countries that are probably the best in the world are those with distributed system, decentralized structures, where you have a lot of agility, a lot of change, they can move very fast. So, I mean, I would guess, I mean, if we would create a Nordic superstate, we would get sort of something like Swedish energy policy, Finnish fiscal and discipline, and Norwegian food prices. And you think sort of you're going to end up with sort of the Nordic being the champions in Olympic gold medal league tables as well. But I think we would get sort of Finnish football, Danish cross-country skiing, and perhaps Norwegian ice hockey. I mean, that's where we're going to end up. So the risk is that you get system that just exacerbates the problem. You lock yourself into structures that have very great difficulties to move.
Well, that's a fair point.
It's an interesting panel, this, I think. So you're against the EU, then? No, just so I understand, because according to your theory, then the concept of bringing 27 countries is an even bigger mess.
Well, as we are seeing right now.
No, but so you're against the EU.
No, but that doesn't mean you need to be against it just because you can see there are disadvantages.
I agree.
But it does mean you need to...
I think we need to define what a superstate, what the definition of a superstate is. I'm not saying, from my perspective at least, that it is one region, one country, one, you know, it's aligning on what would make this region more attractive. I think right now, if I look at it from an investor's perspective, the fact that they, you know, if you look at FDI, the fact that there's a foreign investor having to navigate the 4 different interpretations of FDI, that doesn't make this region scalable or more attractive. I think from that perspective, it doesn't mean that you create one supernation. So I think the concept of what is a superstate is something that we have to decide. I think the concept of what is being discussed from a savings investment unit is not about one superstate run out of Brussels. It's about making sure that there's one more pool of capital rather than 27 pools of capital. There's one interpretation of MAR rather than 27 interpretations of MAR. You know, I think what we can do here from a Nordic perspective is take the lead to show how cooperation can create something much more stronger in making this region overall. So I agree with the concept of creating one superstate doesn't make sense necessarily, but I think the concept of cooperation and alignment would definitely strengthen the region. That's our, you know, so I think it's important to maybe clarify that.
Please.
Yeah, I think investors and entrepreneurs in the end of the day are very pragmatic. They're after return and growth. And for companies to grow and expand in 27 different countries, legislations, cultures, languages, it's just too expensive. It makes it inefficient. So the more alignment, more harmonization in certain areas or domains would just make the growth and expansion much easier, cheaper, and there would be more upside potential for them.
And you could apply that to the Nordics then?
Yes. You know, taking a smaller region would be much easier to implement this approach.
Yeah. Well, actually, the devil's always in the details. You have to define more precisely what you're talking about. You need to avoid getting lazy and keep the innovative spin wheel going, of course. But then there was a defense minister or a minister of war, actually, who quoted Pulp Fiction recently, maybe you noticed. And that's one of my favorite movies. And one of the lines in that film goes, well, what the funny thing about Europe, it's the little differences. So there's lots of little differences, for example, the definition of FDI. So from a day-to-day professional standpoint, where you stand, what's the sort of invisible border that needs to be sort of erased or vanish tomorrow? You said no more regulation, please. So what would you what's on your kill list?
Well, on my kill list are I would copy with pride from Sweden. I would just kill our the Finnish kind of very shitty option taxation. I would kill our taxation on corporate kind of exits being taxed before, even if the founders reinvest. So those are, I would actually say that maybe you don't even kind of need to tear down regulation. You would just copy with pride, like look at the most efficient capital market and do that. And the same, I mean, look at Estonia and do those things. And then we're starting to work together and not having to explain to an international investor every single time that no, yeah, we do have kind of slow, difficult labor laws. And then please remember that we have transfer tax and we have these. So that'd be super easy. The politicians could do it tomorrow.
Right. Anybody else? No hit lists for regulation?
No. Well, I think, you know, again, the concept of the way I think about it is, how do we make sure that we're more aligned rather than just creating one market per se? But I think at the end of the day, if you look at it from this regional perspective, the largest banks are the same banks across the Nordics. They act in 4 different ways in each market because of different taxation laws, different regulation interpretation. We have a company now that's in the process of spinning off their business and potentially do a listing this. In Finland, their prospectus is considered to be an offering. In Sweden, it's not. You know, that has severe implications for this company based on the fact that it would then need to make an offer and it has to do a substantial number of additional work and effort and costs, etc. Now, these regulators meet regularly. They talk to each other. Let's start defining and aligning on making that easier for us to navigate these markets in a more similar way. Again, it's not talking about the Swedish regulator becoming the regulator of all Nordic markets and, etc. But just alignment would make it a hell of a lot easier to navigate these markets. So, and then when you talk about taxation, it becomes very much more complicated, of course, because then you're talking about the funding of each specific market. And that is also very challenging. But I think the concept of looking at just the option taxation is an interesting topic, because at the end of the day, we're really trying to create a stronger equity culture around Europe, across Europe. The option taxation is an interesting dynamic which we in Europe are a bit too conservative on. I think it would be an interesting aspect to explore how we become the most advanced in terms of option taxation, because it is expanding on the equity culture that we already have, which is relatively strong on a European level from a Nordic perspective, because it's about inclusion. The way I look at it from what we've created in the Swedish market is the most social democratic way of inclusion. Basically, everybody has access to shares or to investing in shares in a simple, transparent way. And the pensions are in the capital markets and it's giving returns. That is the reforms that Europe needs to take. Here in Sweden, we have Nordnet, they are a Nordic player. They're dealing with ISKs in 4 different ways across the Nordic markets. I think it would be an interesting exercise to explore what would be a harmonized taxation scheme for options, because at the end of the day, we want startups to have more favorable terms. But it's not only about startups, it's also about established companies being able to include their employees in a more transparent and efficient way. And it's about inclusion, it's about social democratism, it's about making sure that if you take risk, you get a return.
So tweaking there would be our main priority.
Yeah, I mean, the list is long of different things that we need to take, and it doesn't give up sovereignty, but it makes sure that there's stronger alignment for capital to flow. The other aspect is there's a lot of capital which is restricted at each border. So essentially, when you're doing an IPO here in Finland, there's a lot of Swedish capital that cannot invest in the Swedish IPO or in the Finnish IPO. Why is that? How do we make sure that capital flows? And then there will always be local bias. So that means that you will always invest in companies that you understand or follow. But how do we make sure that we take away some of these restrictions so that we have more capital to access in the Nordic markets? If we would be able to do that, I'm certain that a lot of the Baltic companies would look at the Baltic region as a natural partner rather than looking at London or Amsterdam or Frankfurt as capital markets where they want to look for funding. So again, pooling capital, but at the end of the day, it's the competition that's important to make sure that you're creating the right entrepreneurs and so on. But stronger alignment, stronger capital flow, more predictability and regulation across the Nordic region, I think would be beneficial.
Right. I think often the Baltic countries, especially Estonia, they're sort of viewed as this digitized, agile, young economies, or just leapfrogging ahead. I don't know if that's partly myth or entirely true, but what do you think? What's your secret sauce in the Baltic countries? What could we old welfare states learn from these younger Baltic states? Have any advice for us?
I'll get to that secret sauce immediately. But I wanted to comment on the access to capital, where the ideas go. Ideas follow eventually capital. And now we need to look at where the capital is coming. It's coming from US and often from China. And that are large markets also, target markets where they want to grow and expand to US. So get closer to end users and customers, get closer to capital. And that's why, why we're seeing ideas and technologies sort of leaking out of Europe. So, if we can create a larger aligned region in terms of fundraising and also the target markets for customers, then it will be beneficial. It would increase the competitiveness of the whole region. Now I get to the secret sauce, right? We're a small country, which means that running a small country is super expensive. It's a luxury. And we also had luxury to build the small, expensive country from scratch in 1991. And I think we made the right choice when we started building it completely digital from day one. So the whole state was built digital. I just bring you a few examples. In 1996, we started e-banking. In 2000, we started declaring our taxes online. We started e-voting, meaning participating at the elections. I think it was 2005 or so. So the latest state service that came out was in 2024. It was divorcing online. There's nothing much left. We do everything online. But since we started in 1991, people are so used to it. They grew up with digital state services. So what it has created a lot of trust and transparency. People trust e-services and the state. And also now the citizens and taxpayers are somewhat customers, and they're demanding customers. They have quite high expectations to the state to provide these digital services and improve the quality or reliability of these services. And maybe another angle to look at it is it's efficient and accessible to citizens and taxpayers. And it's easy to replicate. So when you were discussing how to create the alignment, we're happy to offer the digital solutions to other countries to have the fast track to alignment.
Right. So then, again, going back to the competition, where we're sort of, well, in a good sense, but also maybe weakening ourselves by competing unnecessarily in some areas. There's not only a sort of jockeying for position for FDI, for money, but also for talent, for actual the smart, sharpest sort of minds. So what do you think? Would it be possible to have a sort of Nordic tech visa, where a person coming to this region could work anywhere with the same sort of paperwork? Or is that utopian to suggest? What do you think?
Well, I think it would really work in the benefit of Finland, of course, kind of challenging the competition idea a little bit. I mean, we're lucky to have a country next to us that isn't high debt, that is growing, that has innovative companies. These founders invest into Finnish companies as well. Our people go there to work, and they do move back eventually. Even the Hanken students come back eventually. So if that's doable, that's not my expertise how to get that done. But if we manage to get more professional international workers to come here, that would of course be great. I think we need to work on our attitudes when they, just them being on the street, that they feel welcome and happy and comfortable, and that they can speak English in the Finnish companies and don't have to learn Finnish. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Anybody else like to elaborate on that or disagree?
No, I'm happy to go, and I'm happy to agree. And someone was saying, yes, but there's a better expression, which is yes, and, which is, why don't we redouble the efforts here? Why just think about a Nordic tech visa? Why don't think about, now we've had pretty recently a proposal coming from the European Commission about establishing what is called the EU Inc., or EU Incorporated, which is to have an idea of establishing companies sort of outside one particular jurisdiction. That was the premise of it, but the proposal, unfortunately, didn't go the full way. Why not have sort of a Nordic Inc., which is that you can establish a company that immediately gets you access into more countries than one? Why not start with, I know you've been to university, attracting university talents coming from different parts of the world as well, where you have different strength at different universities across the Nordic region. ESPA region here being fantastic in terms of quantum, space, probably better than Swedish universities on cellular network as well. So, I mean, the strong assets where we would like to see strong interest from Norway, from Denmark, from Sweden, in order to have much greater collaboration between universities in order to get there. So I think there are sort of huge benefits to come from that, but let's just take a moment to understand where we're coming from. In my native country, Sweden, we are basically now chasing human capital out of the country because we are still sort of working on the premise that we cannot distinguish between what is refugee migration and sort of highly talented labor migration. We have lots of companies with lots of human talent from other parts of the world that are very uncertain about the status, whether they can stay or not. Newspapers are constantly filled with stories about Indians, other Asians from other parts of the world that are unsure if they're going to be able to stay and build a family there. So, and Finland is not exactly a poster boy either for having predictable terms for attracting human capital from outside the world. So we need to anchor these ambitions in something which is realistic and something that we can do that is not going to repeal the next time we change government.
Right. So first we need to stop shooting ourselves in the foot, and then we can aim higher, maybe.
Well, you can do both at the same time, but we cannot just wish away the fact that politics in all Nordic countries have gone in a direction where it's just more and more difficult to make a case for not open borders, but for being open for highly talented human capital that wants to come and use, develop, build their skills in our countries.
Right. Adam, your take?
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think Europe is going through a tough phase in terms of rebalancing, based on its immigration. Now, first it opened its heart, and now it's toughening down, and whether that's right or wrong, I'll leave that aside. But we also have another issue, is that we're not having enough children. So the reproduction rate, and our demographic growth cycle is not exactly positive. It's maybe better than many other regions, but overall, if we don't crack the code on attracting the right talent, it's going to be costly for us. So I would definitely say it would be interesting to approach it on a Nordic level. The other aspect is, if we look at it from a tech perspective, it's not only a tech issue, of course, but you look at it, there's a big focus that we need to finance and grow more tech companies. And there's a big pride that we've done a great job in increasing the access to capital for these. But still, the ambition for these companies is still to grow, innovate here, start, and then scale in the US. Now, the ambition should be grow, finance, scale, but not necessarily with scale in the US, scale in Europe. And let's make sure the Nordic is scalable from day one as well. We're early adopters in technology. I mean, if you look in the Nordic Baltic regions, we are the ones that are quickest to adopt new technologies and new practices. We should be the first market to really scale it more efficiently for many of these technologies. And we should make sure that our universities and our companies are able to attract talent in an efficient way. So yes, I firmly believe that we need to crack this, and rather than cracking it on our own, we should really look at it. Is there a Nordic angle to this, and what is that in that case?
Right. So speaking of a Nordic angle, then, do you think there would be benefits from having a joint Nordic stock exchange where you sort of pool the money into one pot and well, make it easy to have cross-border mergers? So, or is somebody protecting their turf in this sense, that they want to keep things as they are? The status quo is benefiting some, but...
Well, I mean, we own 7 of the Nordic exchanges, so we're not protecting our own, you know, Oslo is outside that partnership, but if I wouldn't jump to the conclusion of one exchange here so quickly, but I think fundamentally, if you look at it from a regional perspective, we're the only region where you have the strongest overlap of banks, owners, investors, founders, the list is long. We also have a strong overlap of culture and governance. So if there's any market or region that could create something which is more aligned from a capital markets perspective, it is this region. And my view is that when you read the Mario Draghi report and this vision of creating one European stock exchange, that's utopia. That's not going to happen. So the question is, would us here in the Nordics work together to create a more aligned Nordic market, whether it's capital, whether it's on technology, whether it's on defense? Would that be against Europe or for a stronger Europe? My view is it's for a stronger Europe. So we can do a lot to make sure that an apple is an apple across the 4 markets. And we can start by looking at the regulators and trying to make sure that the regulators are more aligned and harmonized, because I think that would benefit us. If we achieve all this regulatory ambition, you know, without giving up sovereignty, I think at the end of the day, the question is, what is the next step? Is it one exchange? Is it a stronger alignment? I believe that, you know, the more we do all these steps, the more we will end up in the question, is it one exchange or not? But right now, I think we're too far away on that alignment, and I think we need to speed up on that alignment, and we can do a lot to show Europe the way, to show how you should cooperate, how you should be more aligned, and the benefits of being aligned.
Right. And talking about alignment in another facet, well, we had the central bank chief here today saying that it's above his pay grade to talk about the krona and going for the euro. But, well, I don't know your pay grades, but maybe you have a view on that, because we're burning pretty much, well, several units of GDP each year with the friction between these currencies, which is not optimal from a systemic perspective.
Well, I mean, on our platform, you can trade many different currencies. So my view is, in Sweden, we had just had a large listing. We had very sure list in Stockholm. They chose to list in euros. I'm all for it. So our role as an exchange is to create flexibility. If you want to list in Sweden and you feel that euro is the best denominated value for your company to attract the right investors, please list in euros. So I think we should create a multilateral currency, you know, that's my view. But the question of whether Sweden should join euro or not, again, if our central banker cannot answer that, then it's definitely above my pay grade as well. So, but I definitely feel that we are moving much more closer to that debate again in Sweden, and we should be educating households on the pros and cons. Because if we don't educate, it's going to be very difficult to make that choice once that choice has to be made. So I think we should spend more time discussing it, educating, and then whether the time is right or not for euro. In the meantime, we should create flexibility.
So how about the rest of you guys? Do you see more pros or cons with a single Nordic currency? Would that be a pipe dream? Or?
A single Nordic currency?
Well, like the Nordic countries having the same currency.
Oh, okay. You mean the euro?
Right. Just to be clear.
No, I mean, just to add to Adam's point, which is that if you take the Nordic countries, I mean, it's Denmark, it's Norway. So it's not only Sweden, which is not being part of the Eurozone, it's also a few other countries. If Sweden is going to join the euro, I hope it will. I don't think it's on the card for the next foreseeable future, but given how the economies and other things are evolving, I think there's going to be a much stronger case for it in the next couple of years. But I doubt you're going to find Swedish politicians are going to stand up and say, yeah, it's a great idea to go to a referendum and do that again.
Yeah, you're not going to sweep the elections with that agenda necessarily.
in September now.
Yeah.
I think there is a unified or a consensus position, which is let's avoid the question.
Right.
For this election, for sure.
Yeah.
Any other points on that? The currency or?
From a Finnish M&A lawyer, I think I'll kind of pass.
You take the fifth.
Yeah, exactly. I'll answer the next one.
It would be easier, but I don't think it's a realistic alternative. I'm not saying it would be better, but I think at the end of the day, the way we're taking the position from an exchange perspective, I just look at it from an exchange, is that we want to create more flexibility. And that means working closer with Euroclear on creating stronger links between the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries, making sure that companies can do a list, have more flexibility to choose the currency that allows them to attract more investors and to tell their equity story in a better way. So flexibility in the meantime. Over time, if the Nordics align on one currency, well, time will tell. But I think that's, again, like Fredrik was saying, we're far away from that.
But your point on kind of the joint Nordic exchange would be, again, from a Finnish perspective, very good, because unfortunately we do see our kind of Finnish companies which have a Swedish ownership base, which are somehow known, especially retail, there is a clear kind of value uptick if you would list in Sweden. So we see kind of companies considering it, and that's of course not a good thing for us because we'd want to have a proper functioning kind of bourse here at home.
But I would jump in there because I think, you know, you have some fantastic companies here. We have some fantastic companies here in Finland. And I think the challenging bit is that if you, for example, if you have a Finnish OI, if you don't have a Finnish OI, Finnish investors cannot retail investors cannot invest. That's quite restricting. Yeah. It's protective, but it's quite restricting. The other aspect is there's a lot of Finnish capital that cannot invest, or will not invest in the Swedish market. Vice versa, a lot of capital that will not. So if you take a Finnish IPO, Carnegie, SEB, without doing any advance, Danske Bank, the list is long. If they do an IPO, they will not naturally just have access to the whole pool of Swedish capital. They will build that IPO book partly with Finnish capital, partly with Swedish capital, but spend more time in London. If you would do the equivalent IPO in Sweden, you could do it pretty much in Sweden with some access to Nordic capital, Finnish capital. So I would love to see the opportunity for that capital to be more mobile. But then it's up to the fund manager not to be restricted, but to be more decisive in terms of which companies they want to invest in, for what reasons. But now there are restrictions. We should evaluate why are those restrictions in place, what would be the opportunity cost of opening up those restrictions, because then you would see more capital flow. If you still have one exchange and you still cannot move that capital from Finland to, you know, then what are the benefits?
Agreed.
Right. There is also another thing we'd just add. I mean, this country know about sort of the curse of having one large company which is dominating on the stock exchange with Nokia in the past. I mean, we've had Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen, which was roughly in the same situation, which basically means you also need to have a volume market which is big enough in order to be able to house really big companies. And of course, the more you divide up exchanges in different countries, the more difficult it's going to be. And the more index funds and other fund investors need to sort of tailor the specific strategies they have for investing in a particular stock exchange in order to avoid overexposure, you know, to one sector, to one company, and these type of risks. So it's not an uncommon problem we've had in Norway. In the Nordics. Sweden basically had it with Ericsson if you go back 25 years in time as well, which is that one company is just too dominating. And if we want scale and volume, we need to find ways to avoid siloing up exchanges on geographic terms like that.
I think the volume aspect is quite important, especially when you talk about large institutional investors. Maybe there's a slight difference whether the company wants to raise a lot of money from the stock exchange. Then they might even not look at London anymore, but New York, because that's where the money and liquidity is.
So we've been playing with several interesting ideas here, but let's take it up a notch to the big level. If you were king for a day, what would be your first marching orders to do for the Nordic region to create, or also the Baltic region, to create better elements for collaboration and ecosystem, etc.? Do you have any
well, I agree with Frederick that a superstate is an illusion, but something more cooperative and more aligned from a Nordic region. So I would definitely invite my fellow kings from the Nordic region to sit down around the round table and decide on where do we align and how do we make our market bigger, and then we can compete within that market. But I think at the end of the day, that would be my ambition, to make sure that we are aligned. We're considered, there are not many US investors that necessarily only invest in Sweden. They invest in the Nordic region. Let's make sure that they feel more commonality and a more homogeneous approach for the Nordic region. With that said, with the Baltics in mind as well, because I think from that perspective, there is a spillover effect, and we would also become a more attractive partner for the Baltic region as well, overall, if we were more homogeneous and a bigger liquidity pool overall than what we are today. So that would be my dream.
Anybody else?
I think we need to walk the talk, right? We have been the country that has been counting the FDI forever, and watching how Nordic investors acquire Estonian companies or expand the Estonian market. I think it's time to change it a bit, and not just expect you to invest in Estonia, but make some bold moves in the Nordics as well. For example, one of our portfolio companies, Skeleton Technologies, just opened their super battery factory in Varkaus. Or you can see Starship little delivery robots on the roads in Finland because S-Group groceries are using them. You use Bolt, which is originally from Estonia. Or we have invested in several Finnish or Nordic funds. We invested in Taaleri Solar Wind Fund, and they have a healthy pipeline of battery storage investments in Estonia. We invested in Norsk from Sweden, or Nordic Science Investments to facilitate tech transfer, deal flow in Estonian universities. So we have been investing in the Nordics, or watching our companies to expand to the Nordics, not just to talk about it, but actually, make something real. I think investors have become quite open to do cross-border deals, and there's a lot of cross-border deal flow. We see more and more cross-border teams. Investors have done quite a lot in terms of aligning the market, but I guess the question is what comes next. What else needs to be done to make it happen?
How about Annika and Fredrik? Any points on that?
Well, if I was king for a day, I would force everyone to read Hufvudstadsbladet. And also, because I do it. So I had read you. I thought it was yesterday. At least I had the internet version of
the digital version yesterday. Yeah.
So your Sunday sermon reached me yesterday morning already. So no, but I mean, jokes aside, my point here is basically every time I read a Swedish newspaper, I get incredibly informed about the latest debates which happened in America, but I rarely get information at all what happens in Finland, what happens in Norway, what happens in Denmark, let alone the Baltic countries. I think there is sort of parallel worlds that are going on at the same time, where we have now finally, with Finland's and Sweden's membership in NATO, we have an integration in terms of competence, experience, learning, training practices on the military side, which is far more than we had in the past. On the business and investment side, I see a lot of startups, a lot of companies that basically traverse the Nordic sort of borders, and they sort of born Nordic or born global right away, rather than thinking about being born in one country and then you start there. They operate in all these countries and think that's interesting. On the political side, I see a sort of a development which is roughly going in another direction, which is that there is mutual disinterest in what goes on in each other countries, mutual disinterest in learning from each other, imitating best practices that can be taken from Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, whatever it is. Some of that is because we are also collaborating in the European Union, and we spend a lot of time, diplomatic efforts in order to share policies and shape policies there. But if I was king for a day, I would sort of try to force more of a Nordic polity in order to sort of make ourselves more understanding of each other and being capable of learning from each other as well. Because there is a lot of things that are going on in our countries which are pretty exciting, but it's not as if they're going on in all countries at the same time. They tend to be pretty unevenly distributed, and getting that mechanisms to learn from the best in the region, I think that would be great.
So Nordic mindscape. How about you?
Well, yeah, I think I would continue investing in kind of our deep tech, our technology knowledge, kind of into universities, into kids. So that would what I would do as a queen, then I guess. But then I mean, completely agree with you on that. We are already collaborating a lot. If I think about my daily work, kind of Swedish private equity players invest in Finland constantly. Swedish private equity knows Finnish companies by heart. They bring a lot of capital. And now I think, just like you said from Estonia, our private equity companies are starting to expand to Sweden, trying to do deals there, and that way kind of growing their funds, just being able to attract more funding from LPs by being convincing in that we can also expand. And then, yeah, I think just changing the attitude in that I do think you still should go to the US and conquer those markets, and we have great examples of those in Finland as well. Just Finnish companies being consumer kind of retail companies. Now we had Saxdor sold to Malibu Boats. You know, we have our Longero success story. So I think just kind of working together, going to Sweden, but then also just having the guts to go abroad. That's what I would support as a queen. Nothing else. Everything else can fall apart.
Right. So yeah, I have to specify my choice of words there. I said king for a day, but of course we all know that Alexander Stubb is the greatest head of state in the Nordic countries. Agree? No.
Things like Victoria or Alex.
He's the best golfer.
Question.
He's certainly the best head of state in Finland.
But yes, you mentioned Longkran. I think people are getting thirsty. But first, you have the floor if you wanted to ask a few questions. Now is your opportunity. Anything come to mind from our audience? No, I think everybody's sort of thinking of the cocktails. Oh, up there. Can we have a microphone at the back?
Thank you. Eeva Kärkkäinen is my name. I would like to ask, there is a parliamentary election coming up in Finland soon, and political parties are making their programs. And you touched upon a little bit about this political side when you discussed your work list as a king of this area, but I would like to hear your work list for the political parties. Competitiveness is obviously one of the topics that the parties are thinking what to do to make Finland more competitive, but I think the Nordic perspective is not discussed very much when we are discussing that topic. What's your work list for the parties before the coming election?
So yeah, do you have a wish list or a to-do list for politicians in your back pocket already? No?
I mean, I'm an economist, so I would hope that Finland is going to spend a lot more time thinking about how it's going to grow its economy and how it's going to avoid getting into a pretty alarming public debt situation, which is running pretty fast towards right now. The last time I saw the forecast for this country, it's 1% growth this year, 1% growth next year. You have significant debts that needs to be rolled over in the next couple of years, where you need to start to pay a much higher interest rate than that you did 5, 6, 7 years ago when you took it up. You have a fiscal deficit on, what is it, 4% this year as well. It's forecast for it, and I think it's 4% for next year as well, and then getting down to 3%. So you are, towards the end of this decade and beginning of the next, you're probably going to hit 100% of GDP in public debt, and it's basically a structural problem you have. It's not a cyclical problem. And the longer you delay fixing it, the harder it's going to be.
True words. Anybody else?
No, I mean, the local team here and the local head of the exchange, Henrik Husman, he spends a lot of time with the government talking about the importance of the capital markets and freeing up capital for growth and scalability. And so I think there's a lot of taxation issues that we are spending a lot of time on, dividend taxation for smaller companies. We talk about the option taxation schemes, etc. So we would love to see those on the agenda, because I think these are all part of the equation that you're talking about here, that at the end of the day, if we can make it easier to grow and scale and to create more access to capital, I think that would benefit overall. And then, of course, there's a lot of investments going on now, which we are aligned on the Nordic level, which is energy, defense, etc. Let's make sure it really creates an impact on the growth opportunity for Finland.
Let's make it count. How about the ladies? You have the finishing words.
Since we have elections coming up in Estonia as well next year, it was easy to relate, right? And I think we need to remind the politicians that the old world order is cancelled, right? And they need to think a bit ahead, how to make the economies more resilient, because you need to prepare for the unseen right now, and maybe work on details that look marginal in the beginning or short term. It's also where do we mobilize capital? What do we do with the capital, local capital, for example? Because there's very tough competition across Europe for talent, for tech, for funding, and not just across Europe, but with US and some other countries as well. So we need to think how to make our region more resilient and prepared for the unseen, which might not be imminently, have an impact on the GDP growth, for example, but it can make it more resilient in 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and you have the last word, Annika.
I have the last, okay. I had my 2 taxation points, which I think they should take on the agenda, and then I would just generally hope for kind of less polarization in the discussion. Kind of we need to take things seriously and actually be able to make some decisions. So that's kind of on my wish list, less kind of ideology and more action.
Fully agreed. So I guess there's no free lunch, but there might be free cocktails, and I think you've all earned it. So let's give a big hand for the panel here.
Yeah, thank you to the panel. The cocktails are served just right outside here, where we also had the coffee. So please go and discuss how we create a Nordic superstate or not. Thank you.